Hollywood to today's biggest blockbusters. And he goes on to say how much Arabs have always been vilified. Now, there's been a lot of steps that have been taken to rectify this. However, there's a long way to go. In today's discussion, we have with our esteemed panel of actors, directors, producers for both TV, screen, and film, and also theater, and also allies. We're going to open this discussion. We realize that it's a discussion that is never going to end in an hour and a half, but we wanted to start somewhere at TIMEP. So with that said, I'd like to start with Lameece and ask you a couple of questions first. Let's see. All right. Lameece, you are founding artistic director at the Noor Theater Company. Through your leadership role in Noor, how does the MENA theater community call for equality, inclusion, and on and off stage?
That's a great question. Thank you for having me, first of all. I should probably sort of preface this a little bit and say that the mission of Noor Theater, which I co-founded in 2010 with Maha Shahlawi and Nancy Patali, our mission is to support, develop, and present the work of MENA artists. And that the vision of the company is to center nuanced stories about our diverse community and show that we're not a monolith, and that there's a plurality of cultures and religions and non-religious people within this vast region. And, you know, I'll note that we're not the only Middle Eastern theater company in the United States. We are the only one in New York City. There's Silk Road in Chicago and Golden Thread in San Francisco, who, you know, they've established their own communities as well as language to address the problems in our theater industry. So we came after them. And, you know, I should also sort of say that a lot of the language that we work with and have adopted to address problems have come from the larger BIPOC community. So BIPOC standing for Black, Indigenous, People of Color. So we're in the People of Color umbrella, along with the Asian and Latinx communities and AAPI. And I'd say, you know, I think the catalyst for the creation of the community is that, you know, prior to our founding, our community was involved in a lot of different productions that included me, you know, people of MENA descent, and our community was really growing. And 9/11 really was the catalyst. We were in New York City at the time, and we had this connection to it in a really particular kind of way. You know, that was sort of the moment we became hyper aware that we were being othered in the media and entertainment, and that, you know, we were not only being othered, we were being portrayed, as you were just saying, Jack Payne's book has been saying this for a long time, but we were being portrayed in these sort of urgently problematic and dangerous ways, now affecting us at home and abroad, our families at home and abroad. So we had this growing community of actors, writers, directors, comics, and it became really clear that we needed a home for ourselves. So I think that the inclusion on stage really has to do with centering our mission around MENA artists. So if a MENA artist wants to come in and write about how they grew up in, you know, Las Vegas, like I did, that's totally fine. Yeah. It's about creating representation. It's about creating opportunity for them to tell whatever stories they want in a space that's safe, in a space that's rigorous and thoughtful. And, you know, we don't know everything about every single person in the Middle East or from the Middle East. You know, but that we will have that sense of sort of thoughtfulness so that they can be sort of safe to do that. You know, and it also includes designers. You know, we've worked with designers of Middle Eastern descent, musicians, crew, all kinds of different people, stage managers. So you want to continue to expand all the positions that a MENA artist can do.
Well, I wanted to. Yeah. Sorry, Lameece. I wanted to cut you off here. I wanted to ask you a quick question, a follow-up question to that, because you brought up 9/11, and I wanted to ask you, how has this, since you've lived through that and you were in New York City, how has the story changed since then? How has things changed? Since obviously there's a cataclysmic event, 9/11 happens, it brings us to the, you know, to the spotlight. But since then, how have things changed in your view?
Well, I mean, you know, out of the gate, and I think this is probably across the nation, across the world, you know, you're dealing with being the enemy. And so you are in survival mode. So the stories we were telling after 9/11 is like, oh, we want to humanize ourselves. We want to make sure that you the rest of the, you know, American public feel safe with us. So we're going to tell you stories about how, you know, we're human and we're funny and we are, you know, and sort of you're reacting. You are in survival mode so that you're not sort of seen as that dangerous sort of person. And I think since then, the work has changed and evolved as the language for advocacy has expanded and changed, and what's okay and what's not okay. You're also kind of contending with, and I think this is generational. You know, I was in my, you know, late 20s when 9/11 happened versus maybe somebody who's now in their late 20s, right? What did you internalize at that time? You know, we internalize different things from generation to generation, and we realize what's okay and not okay as we evolve and grow. So that storytelling, I think, follows it, right? So we're investigating, I think, in a less reactive way, although we're always reacting, always, because there's always stuff going on from the regions that we're from. So we're constantly in this, not even the post-traumatic
it's an ongoing struggle,
but like say that again?
Yeah. No, it's saying like it's an ongoing struggle, no matter where, you know, this is, again, an ongoing, you know, hopefully forward and upward battle. And so with that, actually, I wanted to go ahead. Did you want to say something else?
No, I was just going to say, in terms of like advocacy off stage, just very quickly, that we and a bunch of other organizations and artists have created this consortium. It's called, okay, here we go, MENATMA, which stands for Middle East North American Theater Makers Alliance. Yeah, eat that today for breakfast. But what's great about that organization is that solely focused on advocacy, right? So we all have a place to go, present a unified front about sort of our respective cultures, what is wrong in the industry, what is not cool, and addressing inclusion. So it's more organizational than,
That's great, actually. So hopefully after the event is done, we're going to include all of these references to all the organizations that you referenced today and all your works. So that's great. So with that point, I wanted to segue to Nadia. Nadia, you are writer, director, producer, you know, and you are half Egyptian. A lot of people don't know that about you. Your mom is Egyptian. And I wanted to segue to that point to ask you about your work and the challenges that you face and the things that you see in rooms sometimes, whether people know you're Egyptian or not. And that segue from 9/11 to now, that period in between, we've worked on a few things. I want to get you to talk more about, you and I met when you were working on season 1 of Tyrant, the FX show. And I wanted to ask you, in your view, how do you see in these kind of generic writing rooms, like big writing rooms, how are women like from the Middle East being portrayed? If you can reflect a little bit on that, and how these characters are being developed.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Tyrant is obviously, it's like a perfect example for this conversation because of the initial incredible well intent of the network and the writers and everybody involved. They were incredibly excited about putting on the first essentially all Arab network show, you know, and it was predominantly, you know, the characters were predominantly Arab. I mean, there was one actually, you know, white character in the whole show, one American character in the whole show, as a regular. But it was a really interesting example for me because I have grown up being like this bridge person where I've been in rooms, not writers' rooms, just social rooms where I hear people talking about Arabs, and you internalize this thing of at what point do I break it to them that they're, you know, totally offending me. And, you know, sometimes you as that person actually like to accommodate those people and like kind of let them off really easy, give them a pass, you know, and just say, but when you're sitting in a writer's room that is entirely non-Arab and I'm your Arab, that's, you know, there's some work to be done.
Yeah, but there's a lot of work to be done there, yeah.
But B, like what I felt, and I've said this before, and this was not conscious in the room, you know, and I've remained friends with a lot of these writers, and I'm not talking about them as like, these are bad people, but this is it's an exemplary, you know, where the writers did treat Arabs a little bit like I imagine on a room in like Star Trek, where you write about like Vulcans. They're human-like, you know, they have kids, but they don't like their kids as much as we do, you know, like there's this overall feeling of, literally a writer in the room said, I may be going out on a limb here, but I do think this person might be nice to him, you know? And I'm like, wait, why is that out on a limb? Like this is like, you know, so there was this profound, pervasive, you know, like, and these are the people. And what's interesting about all of this is that the show was an opportunity to get inside the mind of an Arab. You know, again, there is no global Arab. These are all individual personalities. And what I ended up functioning as, and I didn't want to function as, was a kind of cultural policeman, you know, where I was like, you know, and, you know, I just really wanted to be a writer, but that was not really, I mean, and Ramy and I had extensive conversations.
We did.
In the background, you know, because there were multiple times where I actually couldn't take the outright racism in the room. It was so shocking to me. And one of the number one subjects that came up over and over again was my desire to represent a character who believed in democracy. And they absolutely refused to allow a dignified person as a third way. You know, they had Islamists, they had militarists, and then there was this void. And I said, well, there are three things.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's one of my points. I'll talk about it later.
And I will.
So many stories to tell you about this.
And you know, props to Gideon Raff, who wrote the pilot, and he Israeli wrote a beautiful pilot where he created this incredible character who was a democratic activist in this fictitious Arab country and who was going to be one of the most important characters on the show. And as the show got through rewrites and Gideon left, and it was before it was even shot, this incredible, like this character who was a journalist, and he was played by this lovely Arab, a Swedish Arab actor. Does anybody remember his name? He has a double name.
Yeah.
Anyway,
before we go on that tangent, I just wanted to circle back real quickly because if I may, I want you to reflecting on that particularly. I remember you talking to me about how one-dimensional also the women were, like development of the women and characters in the show, and how they were like. I remember there's like a lot of issues with regards to like how women were like slapped, for example. Like it was kind of trying to show.
Well, honestly, the female thing. Well, actually, the character that was slapped was a white woman. She was slapped by an Arab. So I will talk. The thing is, the female characters on that show, where they suffered a very different kind of what do you call it? Bias.
Yeah, and that's go ahead.
So I spent 90% of my time protecting the male characters, you know, and the female characters, at least, the worst thing that happened to them is they were just orientalized, you know what I mean? So they were wearing a lot of flowing robes and putting henna on, and you know what I mean? Like, they were,
so I guess that's the production team. That's not the writing team, I guess. Okay, all right.
That's production design.
Nadia,
I think, you know, what was so exciting about the project was that an American network wanted to investigate this incredible story, which was basically the Syrian, you know, a little bit more Syria than Egypt, right? You know, the Bashar Assad and like all of the,
we're gonna get to that and also about Khaled's remarks on it. But before we do that, I wanted to segue from something that Nadia you said about being the person in the room, like you're Arab or like not, or people when you're sitting with them and not realizing that that you belong to that community, and segue to Tarek to ask him a couple of questions about that and about identity. Tarek,
and remind me though, I do want to go back to the identity and the Arab thing, because
there were
incredible scenes that we can discuss where this was.
Yeah. We're definitely getting back to
the name is Faris, Nadia.
That's right. Yeah.
There we go.
The poor guy, and the reason, and Ramy, just to put a pin in that one, the Faris character was supposed to be the fighter for democracy, and they turned him into an incapacitated drug addict. So they couldn't even let one character, and one of the most intense arguments professionally I've ever had in my life was in the room when I recognized that. And I recognized this absolute refusal to portray a rational Arab who believed in democracy. I couldn't believe that wall was actually there with people who win awards for being progressive.
Yeah,
I agree.
And
I agree. Yeah,
that's
a story. I believe this is a story to be told, much more important than Tyrant itself. How this room ended up being from a room that wanted to bring the Arab individual story or the Arab soul into the room in a very important time, the era of the Arab Spring, that got completely smashed when nobody believed in these characters to be as human as others, which is mind-boggling.
So guys, I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to play moderator. Right. So I mean, because this is important discussions, I don't want it to get lost. So let's get back to Tarek really quickly, and again with the segue from Nadia about identity. And Tarek, I was just asking you, identity is a key issue we all struggle with. And a lot of times, particularly for minorities, for people of color, but sometimes our names, like on opposed to Nadia, for example, sometimes our names carry the weight and kind of carry in advance misperceptions or biases that are kind of placed on or stereotypes that are placed on us in advance. And I know you have a very particular intimate story and struggle with that. And if you're comfortable sharing it with us and telling us about it a little bit more with regards to your name and how you've been dealing with that in your work.
Yeah, so first of all, I'm so happy to be on this panel with such incredible people. I feel really lucky. Yes, so I was born and raised in New York City. I grew up going to Palestine pretty much every year from the age of 2 to about 18. So my identity was fully entrenched biculturally in the US and in the Middle East. And I traveled all over Egypt, and I've been to Lebanon, I've been to, Morocco, and, just Jordan, and really felt like I belonged to both cultures. So when 9/11 happened, I had just graduated New York University, and I never felt different than anyone else in New York City. I always felt like I was just part of that melting pot, as they say. Most of my friends were first generation Americans. So 9/11 happened. And, like Lameece was saying, we became suspects in our own city. And so it was basically overnight. I had people I knew well telling me to go back to my own country. I had people saying to mutual friends, he's Arab, but it's okay because his family's Christian. And this was these kinds of things were coming across. I was coming across them every single day. And as an actor, I was in my early stages of auditioning. I had done some theater and gotten a boutique size agent in New York City and was auditioning actively. And overnight, it went from auditioning for any part that came along that I was right for to playing terrorists. And I mean, every single audition was a one-dimensional terrorist. And I was confused more than anything else, because being born and raised in New York, where you feel like you're just part of this, diverse population, I all of a sudden felt completely singled out. In fact, one really big TV show, which will remain nameless, I had gotten an audition for, a recurring character on the show who was not Middle Eastern. And when I got in the room, they asked me my name, the producers and everything. And I told them my name was Tarek Bishara. I hadn't changed it yet to Tom Bishop, so I'll get to that in a second. And they said, they let me read. I did my thing. They're like, great job. But we want to ask you a favor. Can you do us a favor? Stay around and read this other character for us. And so I get the sides. I go out and sign the waiting room, and it's the most horrible, horrible, character. I mean, just the worst, the worst. And that was based on only my name. And I walked inside and I said, look, I can't do this. I just don't want to do this. I don't all of a sudden know why you want me to play this character based on my name. And I walked out. After that, after those experiences, I decided to change my name to Tom Bishops, which was, a huge learning experience for me. I remained as Tom Bishops for 15 years. And of course, my closest friends and family, I think they all disapproved. And I think they all were a little bit, bewildered, because I was so proud of my culture and my heritage, why I would do something like that. And in retrospect, I did that because I wanted to work. I wanted to be considered for my talent. I wanted to be considered for whatever I felt like I could play, not what they thought my culture, dictated I should play, and those characters be one-dimensional. So going through the process in those 15 years, I can't even begin to tell you the kind of things I heard in rooms, at dinners, in meetings. Nadia, I've known for almost 20 years now, and we've recounted all these stories together over many, many dinner conversations. It's devastating. And it's very real. And everything everyone is saying on this panel is 100% true, because it is a universal experience we have as Middle Eastern people, where we get politicized in any room that we're in because of the region that our parents come from or that we come from. And so 2 years ago, I decided to change my name back to Tarek Bishara, because I felt like, number one, it was a fear-based decision to change my name to Tom Bishops. And also that 15-year journey taught me, it made me who I am today. And I don't know if I would have been the same person if I stayed Tarek Bishara. I would have been a different version of it. But encountering so much adversity in different aspects, it convinced me that the right thing to do was I have to be part of a change, and I have to identify as what I am all the time in order for it to be part of the fabric of our film business and TV business. And so ever since then, I changed my name back to Tarek Bishara. It's been busy. It's been a bit of a challenge. I've been told I'm not Arab looking enough now, which is, the irony of all ironies. And the interesting part about that is I always tell people, what does an Arab look like? Because I'm 100%.
Really, what does an Arab look like? Tell me, please. Yeah.
Yeah. And so now I feel like right now, and maybe it's a little late, but it's on my timing. I don't know. I've aligned with my purpose now in a way that I never have been before, and it's coming from the right place, and I believe it's at the right time, and so that's the journey. I hope I'm not talking too much.
No, you're not. You're not. I really appreciate that you shared this with us, and more power to you, man. Like really, I really appreciate it, and I think your story is really inspiring in the sense of, living through. I mean, obviously I can't even imagine. You're a New Yorker, 9/11 happens, your hometown's attacked, and then all of a sudden you are vilified, or at least, typecasted in a certain way to be that villain that actually just attacked your hometown, which is, I can't even imagine. I just wanted to ask you one quick follow-up question before we move on to Rosaline and discuss something different, a little bit different. Can you tell us, Tom Bishops in the room, how was he? For people that don't know him, don't know his background, how was he? How are these interactions or conversations about Arabs that so would happen in front of Tom? And I'm not trying to separate you from like that persona. I'm just saying like that.
No.
You know what I mean? Like if you can tell us like perhaps a little bit how, when this was ongoing for 15 years and conversations that you've had, how were these things happening?
I'll tell you something. There's so many. It's mortifying. The things I've heard said about Arabs and particularly about Palestinians is, obviously as ignorant as it gets. I'll give you some examples, and I'm going to tell them a story that Nadia and I were involved with. That's insane. But first, I'll tell you this. So I had recounted this to a couple of people last night. I was at a group dinner of about 12 people at a restaurant, and we were in the middle of a conversation talking about the Middle East, and someone of prominence said in the middle of the dinner, you know, Arabs haven't contributed anything to the world since the 15th century and they should all be done away with. Not knowing that he has a full-blooded Palestinian sitting literally across from him. So my friend who was with me at the time, she turned to me and she's like she had fire in her eyes, you know? And I've been through so many situations like this before. I had that decision whether I was going to blow the whole dinner up. I mean, figuratively, not literally.
Yeah, well,
whether I was going to start,
we know that.
Yeah, whether I was going to really start going in on this guy and having that big argument with him where it's like, you know, you MFer, I'm Palestinian, how dare you, you're crazy, you're rich. And so I decided at that moment that I wanted to just zing him with, would you say that about Black people? Would you say that about Latinos? Would you say that about gay people? Would you say that about anyone else on in the entire planet, any other group of anyone? That kind of broad stroke, that kind of evil, it's insane rhetoric. I mean, and I said to him, I said, how do you feel comfortable sitting in a table full of people speaking with so much vitriol about, hundreds of millions of people? And he had no response, got up and walked to the other side of the table. And I got out of there. At the time I smoked cigarettes. I went out for a cigarette. I was like, I didn't know what to do with myself. Quickly, another story that, because it has to do with Nadia, and she can color it in. And it's an important story, I think, more important than the one I just mentioned. So Nadia and her sister were co-hosting a event at a prominent Hollywood producer's home. And the event was in order to bring together, I think, Arabs and Jewish people. I believe.
Palestinians and Israelis for
right.
Yeah, One Voice. This organization called One Voice.
Yeah,
so that was a good organization. But anyway, so
and they had a very big Palestinian. I can't remember who it was at the time. He was coming out. He was part of the negotiation team, and an Israeli came, and they were hosting it at this house. And
yeah,
this is a very
Yeah. So anyway, so without mentioning names, I prefer not to. Nadia put me on the list, and she mentioned to one of the co-hosts that I was Palestinian American, and they told her they didn't want me to come to the event. And I'm going to let Nadia finish the story because I think that she understands that she can fill you into the nuance of what happened next, because it was insane.
Well, honestly. I told Tarek, I said, I really think you should come to this. And he said, I'm afraid I don't want to come to, this was before he was uninvited. He said, I don't want to out myself as a Palestinian. He just kind of was going through this struggle of trying to get cast not as a terrorist. And I said, Tara, if there is one room in this city that will embrace you for who you are, it is this room. Please come. It is so important for you to come. And also Tarek's family are very political and have, I don't know if you all know his family. So he comes from a very significant Palestinian family. So there were a number of reasons for you to come. And so I convinced him. I said, you're safe. This is the one place you can come out of the closet. And then an hour later, they call me and they say he can't come because he's Palestinian and he hasn't been vetted. And I flipped out and I said, if first I defended him. He went to NYU,
Yeah.
Then I was like, why am I defending him? I said, if you don't let him come, I'm going to withdraw from the organization and I'm going to tell everybody not to go that I'm bringing, And he suddenly, poor Tarek, who had no idea this conversation was going on, became this battle point. And I'm like, what are you doing this party for? If it's only for show, for people, and you're going to exclude the very people that you're supposed to be having this, So anyway, I finally had to call Tarek and I had to say, because I didn't want him to walk into a weed whacker and just feel like, hey, I'm here, and not realize that everyone's going to be checking his backpack. You know what I mean? That was literally the reason. They were afraid of violence. They were not afraid that he would say something. They were not. This is why it was so shocking to me.
Unbelievable. Truly,
Yeah.
like it's
They were
definitely
afraid that he was going to blow up the party.
And
wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I called my dad and I said, Dad, I don't know what to do. I mean, I really don't know what to do. Am I supposed to go there and be enemy number one in a situation where I thought they were bringing people together? He said, so my dad, you know, typical amazing Palestinian dad, he's like, you know, you put on a suit, you look handsome, you know, make sure you say that, you know, be smart, be smiley. And what he was trying to say was, just go in there and be you. This is crazy and ridiculous, and you have to go. Now you have to go there. You have to show up there. And of course I showed up there, and it was ended up being fine, but not without Nadia and her sister fighting the fight to get me in. You know, I just want to say, and we can move on, Ramy, because I know you probably have to move on. These kinds of things happen to us. I mean, all the time. Things that are said and things that are unsaid. Things that are microaggressions and things that are on a grand level. In terms of in any capacity, in casting rooms, in the world, on productions, and there are a lot of exceptions too, but there are a lot of situations that we've all been in that have been incredibly toxic. And so
no, certainly. And Tarek, I think, you know, I appreciate you sharing the story, because it kind of, it's a good kind of very wholesome story of what a lot of people on this panel and elsewhere and other minorities face, but it just really like captures it. And I'm very thankful that you've shared that with us. I just wanted to make a quick announcement. Some of our panelists, they're very grateful that we're very grateful for their presence, but they have preset events and rehearsals. So I know some will be departing shortly. So I just wanted to keep the conversation going a little bit quicker, not to diminish or demean any of the amazing things that you're sharing with us. Just wanted to quickly jump to Rosaline. I have a lot of questions for you, actually, but I wanted to actually ask you something particularly. We've been now talking about, all of us thus far in this conversation, about being involved as people, as actors or writers within an already pre-established writing room. But I wanted to ask you about being production. I know we've discussed that yesterday, as a matter of fact, and how we can, as people of color, if you will, move from just playing a part versus becoming producer or being content creators. And Lameece, obviously I wanted you to actually also reflect on that as well after Rosaline, and give us your thoughts on it, if that's possible, Rosaline.
Thank you for having me. It's I'm really happy to be having this conversation with you guys. Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of a baby producer. I'm working on 2 projects right now, far sooner, I think, than I thought I would in my career. I was very happy to just be an actor for a while and get into production when I was older. And actually, from when I was in drama school, I was told quite pointedly by a few of my teachers, you know, you should be looking to create your own work. And I think I didn't really understand the value of that. And of sort of the permission, I guess, they were giving me as a young actor, until I got out and saw what I was being offered a lot of the time. I mean, as an actor, you're kind of at the mercy of the script that you get. And then you're at the mercy of, you know, the casting directors who are looking at you, and the producers and the directors, and, you know, the biases that they may have and the backgrounds that they may come from. And what I've found with producing, I mean, I'm very lucky to, you know, have worked with people like, say, Ramy, Yusuf, on Ramy, who has been such a great sort of example to me to see how he works, and kind of go, oh, it's possible. Like, this is, we can do this. But the great thing about it for me has honestly just been focusing on populating behind the camera with a crew and creators who are representative as a group. And the work that comes out of that should naturally be representative, just because, you know, it's not a group of white people trying to put themselves in the shoes of like a brown woman being like, well, what do you think that she would do here? Or ticking, you know, diversity boxes that they want to tick just to look like they're doing the job, as well-meaning as that may be. So that's sort of been my experience so far, and it's not without its challenges. I think, I'm very lucky now to have a team that's very supportive and really understands what I'm trying to do in terms of like agents and managers. I didn't have that to begin with. The first agency I was with, while very well-meaning, my agent said to me, I think in our first meeting, I'm not going to treat you like you are an international client, which was kind of coded for being like, I'm going to treat you like you're as white as everyone else on my list. And it didn't.
Oh, nice. That's so lovely.
Yeah, really lovely. So it's, it's being vocal. And there are a lot of microaggressions and from well-meaning and not very well-meaning people. And there have been outright, instances of quite wild racism, but it's the one, I guess, good thing about it is that it is different to the way it was, say, 4 years ago or 7 years ago when I first started doing all of this. There is at least a language now to call out this sort of behavior, where like 7 years ago, I wouldn't even know how to start. So.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Rosaline. I know Lameece is going to be departing shortly. So before I go to Khaled, because I have actually a follow-up to Khaled about this, but just really quickly, Lameece, if you want to reflect on this and the content creation or creating shows and things of the sort, and if you can give us your thoughts on that as well.
I actually think it's the most powerful position you can be in, and I always tell people, and create your own stuff. I started my theater company around a play that I co-wrote called Food and Fadwa. We produced it at New York Theater Workshop, where we're a company in residence in New York City. So that's how I sort of found my own way, because I wasn't getting great auditions either, and we were getting boxed in. And I think, so what we do at Noor is we throw a lot of money at writers. And we're involved with this organization called Pop Culture Collaborative, and they work to expand, marginalized voices and put them in the mainstream. So we're also commissioning writers to create television and film and theater. So really, it's about creating pipelines. And I think that is the most powerful way to go, is you creating your own content. And now what I'm seeing is there's a lot more room for it. People are sort of after it. I will say something to what Rosaline is saying in terms of agents and managers and populating behind the camera. I say this all the time to people, like, if we want directors and actors and writers who are Mena, but we also want agents, casting directors, people behind the scenes, people on boards of organizations. I mean, that's where you really start to have more power, and because you're not getting asked the racist questions, or you are involved in curating a season or whatever that is. There's more care. So I just think, great, tell your kids to be engineers. Also tell them to be an EP or something. You know what I mean? Like, tell them we need our people in these positions and create content.
We do have a problem in the larger MENA Arab community of kind of dismissing arts as something that is secondary to Copts in Canada are all pharmacists. I mean, it's kind of the biggest joke, right? And I can leave that joke as a Cop. So it's, but I think allyship is a huge topic that we're going to be discussing with Cynthia shortly. But I wanted, before we get to that, Lameece, thank you for that answer. And if you have to hop off in the middle, I really appreciate your presence, and thank you so much for attending with us. Please don't leave. Stay as long as you can.
I'm gonna try to stay a few more minutes. This is so great. Please, you guys are amazing.
Please, I just wanted to make sure. I wanted to make sure that I got that in before I jump to Khaled, because I've been wanting to hear a lot from him. Khaled, good to have you, brother. For reasons we're not going to discuss today, because it would take the rest of the panel. You had your start in Egypt, and you've become, your work speaks for itself globally in many countries and now in the West. I wanted to actually ask you something to kind of reflect on some of the struggles that that transition maybe has been. I know it wasn't very, comparatively, perhaps you've had an easier path or not. You tell us, but others that do the transition from the Middle East to the West when it comes to their acting careers. What are some of the challenges that you're facing in the roles that you're trying to find and get now, compared to back in the Middle East, and how you're perceived here and how you're perceived there?
Thank you for having me. Can you hear me now? Let me just, yes. Thank you for having me. And yeah, I'm supposed to leave at 9 to 9 Pacific Standard Time, but I'll extend it a little bit so I can fit. First of all, Nadia, Connors, it's really refreshing to hear what you had, the experience you had while in the writing room with in Tyrant. That's amazing. It kind of confirms a lot of the stories I wanted to share with you guys here. I think if I want to put a title to what I'm going to talk about today, it's Fate Favors Irony. It's incredible how ironic what's happening in the stories that we see in drama and television and film, and you know how they were going to this direction of becoming current affairs kind of writing, like Tyrant, like what happened in Syria. So bring that. So people were all watching the episodes, almost at the same time, getting news from Syria about the civil war, and like it was almost like same thing happening. So the writing was trying to be more taking the current affairs. So that's a very important theme, because it's very ironic what happened next. What happens next is that the current affairs from the Middle East started happening from the streets of Baghdad or Cairo or Tunisia in the streets of New York. I mean, can you imagine? I mean, this is really a missed opportunity. If you don't have these stories that we think are so important to share honestly with the world, like for example, what happened in Rabat. Morsi, an elected president, decided to call on his extremist fans to protect him, while everybody wanted an impeachment because he derailed from being a president for all Egyptians and bringing justice and so on. So what happens is it just goes around, and that revolution that we think is crushed, it just goes somewhere else. It's exactly what Trump did on Capitol Hill in January 6th. It's exactly the same. You hang on. So it's interesting. I feel that these missed opportunities of telling these stories is so important. And I believe that now the West has a lot to learn from the stories that are missed from the Middle East. And I believe nobody will tell these stories because it's not told. And the only way to have them be told now, like from the experiences that we had, like in Tyrant or whatever, that they completely miss the whole point. They think, or they stereotype the story, like in Tyrant, that we thought, how come that you're missing that the revolution started by young people, by youth? And they're completely oblivious to this when you talk to them in rooms or in back rooms. And like Nadia said, it was mind-boggling that you're policing the writing just to keep it honest. So in Thailand, for example, I was like, wait a minute, where is the young people in this? Who's representing this generation that started the whole revolution? The Tahrir Institute is the Tahrir. The name comes from young people who decided to be there. You're missing the whole point. And so it's refreshing to see that Nadia Connor's work was in that room when that was happening, and fighting the same fight I was doing. I had no idea, by the way. That's why today I couldn't stop myself when Nadia was telling that story. I was like,
no, I'm glad. It was good. It was good. Your interjection was awesome. No,
and Ramy, we will go back to what he's saying and tell him the real story of that episode, because that's amazing.
Yeah, I'm gonna just say that answering your question though, Ramy, is yes, it's crazy to do this switch, but it hasn't been really. I'm lucky in a way because America was always like second home to me. My brother used to live here. I used to come in summers and so on, which kind of made it an easier transition. But living and having an agent here, a manager here, and living this whole process was to me like, whoa, wait a minute. Oh, there's layers upon layers upon layers of really discovering that there's so much ignorance and misunderstanding, but also white supremacy, the whole thing shebang. And basically when Trump was in power and having what happened in Capitol Hill in January 6th, was to me, it was like, how ironic how ironic that today we are living in New York, something that happened in Egypt under Morsi's crazy rule when he called on his extremist fans to, support his staying and not getting him impeached. So it's just fate favors irony. And I have to say that the only way to get these stories out, and it's an opportunity for the Western audience, really very important. Now the Western audience need to learn from what we went through, because it's happening here. It can happen anywhere. And that's the lesson that I would love to share with you guys, that I think there's a lot of irony going on, and I think we need to tell the stories. Right now, there's a story happening in Egypt that nobody's talking about. These young teenage boys and guys and girls who are taken into incarcerations because of an opinion, because of a Facebook page. Abdurrahman Gindi, teenager. It's even unconstitutional to have him incarcerated for 7 years. He just got out. Yeah. And there's another. I mean, there's so many of those, and I can't believe that we're not telling these stories. Ayman Musa, his friend, is in jail till today, and we're not telling these stories. The whole world needs to know these stories, because guess what? If we don't, it will happen in America. It will happen in Europe. It's coming to you. I mean, we need to really be truthful to these stories. And there's irony going on that if you don't tell these stories and think that, it will never happen in the West, it happens in the West.
Yeah, there's definitely lots to learn, and the Middle East has a lot to offer when it comes to stories and things that, and believe me, Khaled, you and I think are on the same page when it comes to that for sure, and everybody I'm sure on the panel as well. But just for the sake of time only, I'm not undermining these stories. That. Just to get, also I wanted to get to Cynthia, because last but not least, when it comes to this rotation of questions, Cynthia, you've been a great ally of this cause. And in fact, I am grateful. I have to say this publicly. I'm grateful to you, because I only know Nadia because of you. Because when you were working on Tyrant, I've seen, and I appreciate the type of allyship that you do, is that you push people from the region to work on these things, and you kind of stay in the background. So I wanted to ask, and I really appreciate that, and I know you've been helping a lot of people. I'm not going to mention other people's names. They can speak for themselves. But I really appreciate that type of allyship, and I think we need more of it. And I wanted to ask you more about what got you into this, and what got you to be passionate about, being former ambassador, and then focusing on this issue, particularly through your organization, MOST. If you can tell us a little bit more about that, and how's that struggle been going, and what got you to be involved? Tell us more about that. I'd love to hear that.
Thank you so much, Ramy, and thank you everyone for including me in this. I owe special thanks to Khaled, and also you, Ramy, and Nancy, for really giving me such a vivid picture. I wasn't there at the Egyptian Revolution. Khaled and I talked a lot when it was going on, so I felt I was kind of maybe there a little teeny bit, but you have given me such incredible insight into what went on at that extraordinary time. And I was able to visit a little bit afterwards to get my own sense, but I'm really grateful for the insights you all have given me. And I am struck, just to follow up a little bit on what Khaled said, and then I'll go back to answer your question, Ramy, that the United States is doing just what the Egyptian government did. If you're watching the rewriting of January 6th, suddenly the Republicans don't, it was just like some minor little incident with, nobody was violent there. It's just like all the revolutionaries are wild radicals who want to blow up the world. We're doing exactly the same thing. So I'm sorry to say I agree. But what am I doing here? I was invited, I was the ambassador to the Netherlands, by the way. So really, what am I doing here? But I was invited by a fluke. Everything in my life is by a fluke. I'm trying to help a friend, and I land in some really great place for me, and that was never even my intention. And that's how I ended up working for the Brookings Institution at a time when they were, as many U.S. think tanks were, in a kind of post 9/11 mode. What can we do about this? because we do need to understand these people, people like you who we clearly can't understand without organizing conferences and stuff. So they were organizing an annual U.S. Islamic World Forum in Doha, Qatar, a nice place to get to know people and increase understanding, but they have good hotels, and they invite people. So I was invited to organize groups of arts and cultural leaders to come together there. And I'm so sorry I didn't know all you guys then. I would have, well, you're so young, you probably were children. But anyway, I would have liked to have had you there. And we really had a fantastic time over about a 5 or 6 year period. And we had American film and TV producers and fantastic writers and actors and musicians from all over Muslim majority communities around the world. At one particular moment, I remember we had an Iranian hip hop artist, Yaz, freestyling with a member of DAM, Mohammed Moghrabi, in the lobby of the Ritz Hotel in Doha. It was pretty fun. And all that was carried on Second Life, this weird brief time platform. Anyway, we did some crazy things. It wasn't like the rest of the forum. And we formed a real network and real bonds of friendship and support. But we also asked ourselves, and quite honestly, Brookings asked us, so what are you going to do with this increased understanding that you've managed to come up with? What can you actually develop that's somewhat concrete out of this? And so with the help of Alex Cronemer and Michael Wolf of Unity Productions Foundation, which is a nonprofit film company that produces documentaries, they're all viewed on PBS. They've had a tremendous impact. They're starting on a new fantastic project called Muslim Road Trip, which they're going to do in the US. But we kind of brainstormed around this and we thought, well, where can you impact perceptions? Where are these negative perceptions being formed and reinforced? And of course, it's in popular entertainment. And that there's no point in us writing another Brookings paper, that my family and 3 other people are going to read, but we wanted to try to have an impact on the places that people were getting these ideas and where they were being enforced. So we formed MOST, Muslims on Film and what is it called? Muslims on Screen and Television. That's such a catchy thing. I always forget what it stands for. MOST Resource, which I co-direct with Michael Wolf. And our goal is to advise, not to kind of terrorize and scold, but to advise and consult with writers, producers, showrunners. Not that we have the answers, and God knows I don't have the answers, but what we do is find actual representatives. So if we work a lot with medical procedurals, we've introduced them to a whole range of Muslim American doctors. So if they're going to have a doctor on their show, they can talk to 25 doctors or 20 or 10 and find out, get a sense of what their lives are like. And of course, no individual represents a whole group, but at least, you have a connection with someone. We've worked with shows that have had, for example, refugees. We worked with a show that had an Iraqi teenage refugee girl who was coming to the United States for a medical procedure. Well, they were going to shroud her and, have her not have any idea what McDonald's was or anything like that. And we were able to connect them with 2 recent teenage Iraqi refugees. And they were able to say, no, we're not just like Americans, but we wear blue jeans, we know these things.
We also have cell phones. You also watch YouTube,
And so I would like to transition into Tyrant here, because Ramy, as you know, we did have an interaction. And, I knew people working on the show. I had nothing to do, MOST had nothing to do with the first season. And I was, I said, how regrettable that you did an entire season and never consulted us at all.
Yes.
And their response was, oh, that maybe was a mistake. And so invited MOST to convene a whole group of people who were directly involved with revolutions. Two things, directly involved with either the revolution, so we had a fantastic young woman from Syria, we had Ramy and Nancy, or new dictatorships. So we also had someone who'd lived in Iraq and someone who'd lived in Jordan, which seems to be on its way to becoming a dictatorship. And we had a sit down with them looking at, I believe, the pilot or episode 1, and after descending from the ceiling where we were all floating back down to our chairs, we said, well, you just have to just completely rethink the whole thing. But rather than saying, here's what your plot should be, which that is not what we do. We just let them listen to stories of what the people on the front lines, like Ramy and Nancy, and like Hiba from Syria, had experienced, and what the incredible things they had done, and the incredible courage they showed, and the incredible solidarity they had with the other people they were with their families, with people they didn't know. And, it was just such a different picture from what they had given. Now, it wasn't smooth sailing from then on. At all, but they let us have a very close, detailed look, and they sought our advice on what was said and what was going on. And and they introduced a new character. The second season began with a young graffiti artist, and who remained a through line through the rest of the series. And again, it isn't perfect, and we don't say, as a rule, no, that's terrible, you can't do that. Occasionally that happens. And they had an idea where there was going to be some kind of transaction of money with the implication that revolutionaries were being paid for what they were doing. And there we just said, no, you absolutely, you cannot do that. And we went just sort of ding, ding, ding. And, eventually they took that out, and all the perceptions you're talking about are there. And I think what we try to do at most is really work with writers and not scold them and not shame them, but work with them and provide information. And we've done that with shows like Madam Secretary, Grey's Anatomy. I just want to say that there are different ways you can make an impact. There's a show like Ramy, which is very concentrated on the kind of humanization. And then there are, episodes within a series that somebody watching Grey's Anatomy, or even Transplant, which I just, think is such an excellent show, isn't looking for a portrayal of a Muslim or Middle Eastern character. But suddenly they find it. And I think it's really important to reach those audiences also. So,
you're sorry. No, sorry for interrupting you. I know, Nadia, you wanted to reflect on that, but just to be cognizant of time, we only have about some 20-some minutes left. And I have one explosive question that I want to ask, and I wanted to start with Rosaline, and I would love to get everyone's input on that. And that's upcoming productions of certain movies and films. Rosaline, a little known fact, at least for me, about you, that you are a trained archaeologist, as well as being a phenomenal actor and producer. And I wanted to, this is a broad reflection, and I'd love everyone's input on it. We've seen in Hollywood the representation of historic figures and characters from the Middle East over the years. And we are hearing a little bit about, for example, a new project about Cleopatra, if you will, that is ongoing, the production of it. And there has been some uproar about it. There's been articles, even it's been picked up. The uproar has been picked up by articles like the Guardian, newspapers like the Guardian and elsewhere. And there's been some controversy about this issue, that there aren't Egyptians being represented, or either in the writing room or for the main characters. So Rosaline, I know you have some thoughts on that, and I wanted to start off this like second part of the conversation with your thoughts, and then I would love for people to chime in if possible.
Sure, thank you. So yeah, I mean, it's kind of interesting because we're having parallel conversations in sort of like film and theater and in storytelling and also in like archaeology and Egyptology, basically the main gist of them being, you know, are modern Egyptians allowed a connection to their history, to their ancient history, and also their kind of more recent history? And that, unfortunately, a lot of the time has not been the case for various reasons, colonialism being one of them. Also kind of state narratives that change, but you know, with things like Cleopatra, and I'm not going to talk about Cleopatra specifically, just because I think it's symptomatic of a much bigger problem, which is, you know, I think we've become used to, and Egyptians are not alone in that, but you've become used to not seeing yourself represented in stories that are about you, you know, and that's just another level of disconnection. It's another level also of just kind of, it's a status quo as well. I mean, like I remember when I got my audition for Ramy, I was like, wait, I haven't seen myself on screen before. And I hadn't even realized that it was something that was missing, because you become so used to that representation being not there. You know, I love Elizabeth Taylor's Cleopatra. I grew up with it. And now I'm like, why was she white? Why did we accept that? Why did my mom love that movie? It was just there didn't seem to be an alternative. I think that, you know, it's more and more important to me, definitely with the projects that I'm working on, that we allow people a connection to their past, a connection to, you know, the stories they inherit, maybe the ancestry that they inherit, because I think when you rob people of their history, you also rob them of their potential. So it's quite a personal thing for me. And, you know, I know this is kind of off topic for a lot of people in here, but in terms of archaeology, there are so many amazing activists, you know, in Egyptology who are working on sort of connecting Egypt's ancient history to its modern inhabitants, and also not making it seem, I think for a lot of people in Egypt also, when they look at their ancient history, it's either someone who is not Egyptian portraying it on screen, or it's someone coming in and telling them that they can't dig in their backyard, or else, you know, like that kind of thing. It's not, or it's tourists coming to visit the pyramids. Like there's a whole kind of dearth of connection that is really important to fix.
Yeah, no, I fully agree with you, and also with regards to representation and like how we're represented. There's a great, like, very short quote from a New York-based activist and artist, Ty Defoe. He says, you know, those who are not represented cannot be remembered.
Yeah.
And I think it's so true. And Nadia, did you want to chime in with some thoughts on the subject and other issues?
Well, I mean, yes, but also I think what Rosaline is saying is so beautiful that I almost want to stay in that positivity, you know, because we could have a separate Zoom about the representation of the Arab Spring on Tyrant and how that went down. And it's a fascinating case study. But I think what she's saying is so powerful because it opens it up to this idea of identity. And I think we all feel to a different degree. I know I do. I've almost cried 5 times on this call. And it's because of this grief of being invisible. And if what you said, those who are not represented or not remembered, is that what you said? Yeah. And I think we've all lived with this quiet acceptance to a certain degree that we just will not be represented. But in our lifetimes, we've seen Indians become norm. You know, we've seen so many other people of culture and color move into a mainstream. And then once those like more typical stories of who they are explored, then they're suddenly free to play any character, you know? So I think that we are, you know, like Lameece, who just left, said, you know, we have to work on both fronts, our ability to tell the stories, and also Khaled, what you were saying, our ability to tell the stories that we need to hear that are happening, but also to empower and ally with people like Cynthia and across the board to show these other really beautiful stories. And I'm really moved by this idea that we have to start expanding what our voice even means. And I know it's hard because we've got so much unsaid, you know, and there have been so many decades of invisibility. So, but I thank you for that. I think it's a beautiful way to, you know, a direction to go in.
Sure. Do you have reflections on this issue of the idea of representation, like how like our communities are misrepresented in general? I think you're muted.
Yeah, sorry. I think rather than offer how we're misrepresented, because I think that's really clear, I think the way forward towards representation has to do with what comes next for you know, people of Middle Eastern descent or allies, and how to empower people to get the stories out there. You know, what is it going to take? And I think what it's going to take is support. Support emotionally, support financially, with resources, like we were saying before about representation and such. You know, for me personally, I could just speak from my personal experience. You know, you can write and create as many projects as you can. I know we all have that file on our computers, and I have recently, you know, optioned a Korean film to remake and a Mexican film to remake with, I'm remaking them with Arab American narratives and characters. But if you don't have access to the resources necessary, if you don't have access to the agencies, if you don't have access to the managers, if you don't have access to the producers, development funds, et cetera, that do not exist in the Middle East, that are like purely here in the Western kind of part of the world, then it's all for naught. And so I think, you know, for instance, if there are streamers out there that are in the Middle East, or the streamers period, that's a game changer for people like for the Middle East. Because before, you know, when The Irishman would come out in cinemas, you know, there's very limited amount of, outside of Egypt, I'll say, limited amount of theatrical distribution. But once the streamers came in, all of a sudden an audience of over 300, 400 million people is able to press their button and watch the movie. So therefore now those streamers are responsible to catering towards their audience. Now we are part of that audience, and so is all those people in the Middle East. So now I feel like it's, the onus is on, you know, the powers that be to help us create the content, help us produce the content, help us develop the content that then we can deliver to our own people. And, you know, I just want to say, it is unfair that the only person I grew up with is Omar Sharif as an idol. I mean, you know, with Ramy Malek and Ramy Youssef are amazing, and they have done so much in such a short period of time. But, you know, it's like you can count them on one hand, and there's hundreds of millions of us that deserve to see themselves on screen. I deserve to see my dad on screen. I deserve to see myself on screen, as do all of us here. I think it's so important. I mean, to me, this is like my total purpose is to kind of like, let's get on with this. You know what I mean? Like, where's the Arab American Green Lantern, for God's sakes? You know, he was in the comic books. Let's put him in the show. They're developing a show right now. You know, I'm a comic, you know, nerd. And so for me, it's like, I want what African Americans had with Black Panther. I want that for Arab Americans too, or for Muslim Americans or whatever. And I think we can. Where's the romantic leads in films that are Arab? Why do we have to be politicized? Where's the romantic comedies that have our characters in them? So I think there's a way forward, but we need to get in. We need a way in. We need, like we were all talking about before, the producers, the directors come out of the woodwork a little bit and kind of guide us in that way. If you're trying to create a show, okay, how do we get this in front of the right people to say, look, this is viable, or this is really not viable? Go back to and learn how to do it. You know, learn how to create your own material, not just take stabs at it. So,
right. Sorry, actually, I'm glad that you bring this up. I'm sorry, just really quickly, because like, again, we're running out of time, but I actually got maybe some up to 20 or 30 like comments and remarks from like young filmmakers who are Arab American or Western Arab, I guess, asking for advice on how to like break that ceiling. And this is really heartening. Like I've gotten lots of different like private messages. I think there's also a couple that are public here. If either Khaled or Cynthia want to jump in, and Khaled, you have that experience of breaking that ceiling, man. So if you wanna chime in, and Cynthia also would like to chime in.
Yeah, I mean, yes, there is a conclusion that I wanted to really share with you guys that I kind of reached over the past few years, which is if you don't find your story or your representation that you think is missing, if you don't find it in art, start writing it. Start finding it. This is what happened with Ramy Youssef. This is what happened in a lot of new projects like Noor, the project with Noor the Theater, Golden Thread in San Francisco. Right now, I'm doing a play at Marine Theater written by Denmo Ibrahim. She's Egyptian American, and it's based on stories. It's really based on stories told by Palestinians, Lebanese, Egyptian people, and she's first generation American. She's never been living in the Middle East, but she's feeling this connection. It's very interesting how she wrote things that I thought was almost like I wanted even to ask her, how did you come up with that? It's almost like your DNA kind of tells you a story. Remember in the revolution when Mubarak decided one way of shutting down the revolution was to shut down the internet, because that's what brought them all together and made them all organized and shared ideas. And suddenly it was the biggest, it was the first million march, I think, because everybody thought, okay, let's just go to Tahrir then. And then all of a sudden, at the right time, everybody was there. So it's interesting. And I believe that, again, irony, fate favors irony. So I believe there's an unfolding story that's happening. And it's not just the Arab Spring or the Arab story. I think it's a world story because of the internet. The disruption this internet made to our lives is still unfolding. It's unfolding in what happened with social media and how that brought people into understanding and having an alternate story from the narratives that are told in the media by the repressive regimes to begin with, but also in worldwide as well. And that gave people a way of really seeing an alternative narrative of everything, and that was wonderful. It's very disruptive, and I think it's still unfolding. When it happened in the Arab world, Arab Spring, it's just because it was the most repressed region in the world. But it went to Hong Kong. It went to New York, Wall Street. It's happening right now in America with Black Lives Matter. Revolutions and ideas are now, they're like energy, I believe, and they can keep flowing. And I believe we are still living that. It's unfolding. And the next one that I'm actually, this is what the lockdown of COVID made me study, the blockchain technology, and how is that going to be disruptive to the banking system and the economic chaos that we're living right now, and how that is democratizing the future. Also the arts with the NFTs, but that's a whole different story. But I want to come back to two important points that I missed earlier. You said the 9/11 till today, the comparison. Here's an interesting story I want to tell you in a nutshell, like a quick one. 9/11 happened. Right after that, there was a film called Civic Duty, written about an homage to Rear Window, Hitchcock's Rear Window. And I acted in this film. It was one of my first endeavors into the American filmmaking. And that was shown in Tribeca Film Festival. And Civic Duty was about this character who's a neighbor to a typical American, but this guy comes from an Arab background, and how the media created all these scenarios in his mind and played with him. And that film, right after 9/11 in 2006, was very interesting because it tried to really capture what was going on in the psyche of Americans at that time. Jump to Tyrant and how the psyche changed, and trying to figure out what are these Arabs and culture and characters are, at the same time failing miserably in the writing room to really see them as equal humans, that we have enough things in common to create stories that are compelling. And moreover, and truthfully, we have stories that are very important to be told to the Western audience, to learn from experiences. So, ironically, yes, that's what's happening right now. So yeah, just wanted to share that one and finish off with saying that we need to write our own stories and learn how to write our own stories. Denmus Ibrahim play Brilliant Mind is a father, again, reflecting about on his life with his daughter and son who are American. And it really, captures that sense of misunderstanding and repression. And that's, I think, if you ask me, at the heart of why these stories are very important to be told right now.
Great, thank you, Khaled. Cynthia, did you?
Yeah, I'll just jump in with, first of all, you guys should know that you have company. You are not the only people that Americans like to victimize. This is a thing that Americans do. We're not the only people, certainly the only people who are prejudiced, but look what's happening to Asians and the AAPI community now. It's just insane that some poor young woman in Atlanta or wherever is responsible for COVID. It is simply insane, but it happens. And Americans do like to victimize and blame. And when you have a president who exacerbates and voices this racism for 4 years, it makes it so much worse. We are very bad at humanizing and recognizing people as people. I will fully admit that. And I think something that will make that better are both kinds of representations. Of course, you want to tell your own stories. I totally get that, but because we have a commercial entertainment system, trying to get that told is always very challenging. And the other kind of representation, if I understand correctly, is literally being seen in roles, and those will not always be your own stories from your own life and your own place, but you will be seen by a large number of people. And I'm sorry to say that in that respect, I feel as if we have actually gone backwards. And this is out of the purview of most. We don't particularly work with casting. We don't really have an oar in that water, but I'm just going to go back to, I know Omar Sharif is a super complicated person, but just to state this, in 1965, he was a heartthrob in a Russian movie. And nobody said, what's that Egyptian doing in Russia?
Well, yeah, a story about a Russian doctor, but an American production.
Correct, but nobody said why is an Egyptian in the snow in Russia? They just said, wow, is he ever handsome? And I'm looking at Khaled and Tarek, and two extremely, if you'll forgive me, handsome men. And how often do they get considered just to be a male lead that calls for a good-looking man? That we seem bizarrely to have gone backwards, and I don't know why that is, but I think at every part of this industry, and something I'll just mention briefly, that one thing we've done, and I'm listening to you, I think we need to do it again. We did convene a couple of years ago a writer's room of young Muslim American from all over Muslim majority communities, writers who came together and spent a week, and we, paid them and let them meet together. They'd always been the one in the room. It was the first time they were together, and Samir Gardizi curated it and kind of led the room. And many of them, I spoke to Shireen Razak, who's an EP now on a show, just said being together and being able to share human stories was tremendously affirming. So I think that's something maybe we should do again, not for a product, but for nurturing talent.
Yeah, no, I was just about to say, we've been getting a lot of questions actually about that. So it seems that there's a lot of people that have been watching in and out of this panel that are young filmmakers, aspiring filmmakers, Arab American, Muslim American, that they want the help and the resources. So perhaps, Cynthia, we need to discuss this and actually share that with our audience later on. Rosaline, go ahead, please. You're muted, I believe.
There we go. So I have two very quick things to say. The first about young filmmakers. So I have, over the past couple of years, actually talked to quite a few streamers, both in the Middle East and here, both through kind of producing duties and also through festivals where I was, doing a lot of the workshop work behind the scenes for young filmmakers. And something that is kind of being said in all of these rooms in common is that they really are still trying to capture what young people are doing online in terms of creating their own content, and they can't do it. And there is so much power right now. And I know that it also sounds kind of like very floaty and like, well, like I can make my own stuff and put it online and who's going to see it? But there is so much power right now in terms of, editing your own things. I mean, like when I was a teenager and I was like making YouTube videos that I'm never going to show anyone ever again, like I was like the only person who was doing that, and it was weird, out of my friends. And now you can do it on your phone, and the followings that you create, there have been quite a few people, especially in the past couple of years, who have gotten incredible resources sent their way just by amassing a following online from people who are looking for their content and not finding it in the mainstream. So I would really recommend, like everyone here has been saying that, including especially Khaled and Tarek, write and create what you can, because unfortunately, a lot of the time you are waiting for that attention, and until the tide shifts, until you're not looking at the majority of people being, making these decisions being, unfortunately, like white men, there's still a lot of work to be done. So we need to create a lot. The other thing I want to say very briefly, and I know Ramy, you mentioned it briefly at the top of the panel, and we spoke about it before, is I know that we want to have these conversations again, and I'm grateful to Tahrir for hosting us, but I think we really are missing the voice of Black Swana creators and or Afro-Arab creators on this panel, because there's an added layer of discrimination that they face. And I think with everything that we put up with, we also do, all of us benefit from, a light-skinned privilege, both back home and in the States. And I've been seeing that a lot. So it would be great to kind of make sure.
You're absolutely right. And Rosaline, thank you for bringing that up again, because that's something that I'm cognitive of, but even though I'm not cognitive of enough. And I, on behalf of TIMEP, at least, I will say, our plan is to have at least 2 more events on the issue, on this broader issue of representation in media, with although we'll miss you guys, but with other panelists that are more representative, also with all different sorts of people from the Middle East. And again, even with those panels, we will not be able to cover everybody, all the minorities from the Middle East. We're running out of time, so I wanted to just Khaled, 1 minute maximum. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I was pointing at Nadia. She needed to share something. Yeah, I would love
Nadia,
to.
I'm so sorry. Go ahead.
Maybe finish this with what you started.
No, Nadia, go ahead. Nadia, you can go ahead and then give me a minute to wrap up in the end.
Okay, as succinctly as possible, because I regretted not responding to your question, because I do think it's relevant about the representation of the Arab Spring on Tyrant. And I'll make it very quick, and because it does connect to everything everyone is saying. And to my horror, in the room, they wanted to represent the Arab Spring as the trigger for the Arab Spring, the man who sets himself on fire. They created a backstory where that man was paid by Islamists to create a fake movement, a fake democratic movement. And so as eloquent and as calmly as possible over numerous hours, I said, you cannot do this because you are robbing the voice of democracy. This is a movement that's happening right now. It's been a movement that's been happening for decades. It finally has its moment in the sun. You cannot rob it, hijack it with this Western idea that, of course, in there, sneaking in there is some Islamist like plot. And also that Arabs are so sheepish that they're like, okay, if you pay me, I'll set myself on fire. You know, I mean, that's also insane. It's like you're either a victim or you're like single-mindedly evil. So anyway, I said, and they said, but this is a fictionalized country. It's a fictionalized story. I said, but you're setting someone on fire to start a revolution in a place you're calling the square. And so I said, this is not fictionalized. The only thing you're fictionalizing is the cause. And so, you know, voices were raised. I thought that was my last day on the job, you know, and they left. They came back into the room. I'm talking about showrunners now. And they came back into the room and they said, you know what, Nadia, you're right. You're right. And I was like, oh my God. And they said, we're not going to call it the square anymore. We're going to call it the plaza. And so that was, you know, that was the response. Like, we're just going to rebrand it. And yet it optically basically robbing a current history and giving it to our worst, you know, ideas of these people. So then thanks to Most and Ramy, when they showed them after they filmed it, after I like slipped my wrists in the room, Ramy was like, no, we don't give you the stamp of approval for this episode. So then they asked him, well, what should we do? You know, and then he called me, and then together it was like Cyrano de Bergerac. I told him what to tell them, what to change in the room. And the only victory we had was this one tiny thing removed, that the man was paid. And that's it. Everything else was ridiculous. Yeah. At least we removed the original sin. And that was robbing the Arab Spring of its democratic.
Yes.
And this is why it's important for people like Nadia and everyone else to be in the rooms where these things are going on, so that they're able to, you know, I know Nadia really well. She's one of the smartest people I've ever met. So she was probably as diplomatic about it as possible. But, you know, there's many rooms that this right. But I'm saying to you is that on TV shows, on movies, to have people like us, or, you know, the stories that these stories are about, the people whose stories is about, it's important that they're actually in there, at least planting seeds, at least starting the process of, you know, we should be doing more than starting the process. We should be, you know, involved in a very large capacity. But at least they tried to, you and Nadia and Ramy tried to actually fight the fight. And I mean, at least that there was someone in there to fight the fight to some capacity. I mean,
and on that, it's actually Ramy was the one. I called him and I said, I have to quit. And he said, no, you can't quit. And I said, but I'm a failure. I haven't successfully changed this narrative. And he said, Nadia, nobody expects you to win. They just feel good knowing you're there. And he told me like what he learned in his life, and that he promised himself when you saw someone get shot in the Arab Spring, a friend of yours, that you would never stop talking. You would never stop showing up and talking. And because of that, I went back every day until the end of the season. And I thank you for that, because it was one of the most important experiences of my life.
Thank you. Thank you,
so,
Nadia.
can I add one thing?
Okay,
sharing
this above,
this information with me, just listening to what you're saying, Nadia and Tarek, is so refreshing, because I had the same kind of experience, you know, going back and trying to figure out what's going on with Cynthia knows the story. And I came up with the same conclusion. Never let them tell your story not in a truthful way, especially when it's twisting it completely, like the craziness that was happening at that time with the Muslim Brotherhood claiming they started the revolution, being now in a TV show. So thank you so much for doing that. And you know what? We should all stay in this joyful fighters as possible, and not let that ever puts us down. Thank you so much, Nadia.
Thank you guys. Thank you, Khaled. Thank you, Cynthia. Thank you, Tarek. Thank you, Lameece. Thank you, Rosaline. Thank you, Nadia. such an honor. Very like colorful, delightful conversation with ups and downs of like actually emotions. And I was about to get teary in the end too. So wrapping it up, I'm honored to know all of you. I want to also extend a thanks to Dr. Nancy O'Kale, TIMEP's former executive director, for inspiring this event actually. Also my friend Salma Zohdi, who has helped me put together this panel, and my colleague, dear colleague Tess Bolt, who also helped, and everybody else at TIMEP. On behalf of TIMEP, thank you for attending this awesome event, and look forward to more events on the subject. And thank you all again. It's been an honor.
Thank you.
All right, take care. And Ramadan Kareem. Take care. Bye.
Good luck.
Thank you, Ramy. Thank you, everyone.